Welcome back, everyone. We have had a event-filled day, and we have one more amazing panel coming up. So stay tuned. I want to welcome you back and to say thank you for sticking with us. I know every year we talk about, not having too much. I've been called like team too much sometimes, but I know we've had each and every one of the sessions have been phenomenal. Hopefully y'all had a great experience in the fireside chats. I'm looking forward to hearing some feedback on that. But today, right now, in this moment, we have a panel of phenomenal women that are going to help us have a greater understanding around this whole attack in language and things that are happening around this critical race theory. As you all know, this is a hot topic among lawmakers and groups, most often being left out of the conversation are Black girls, and just our voices and what we feel need to happen. Just I think earlier this week within a local school district, there was some conversations around critical race theory and getting the school board to not have language that and content that was related to African history or African American history. So this is something that we know that is not only happening locally but nationally, and so we have some experts and people who have a great perspective and help us to understand it on a different level. So today's panel will center on the needs of our girls. So please help me in joining and welcoming Dr. Venus Evans Winters, who will be our moderator. She's no stranger to our summit, has been our keynote speaker in the past, and so she is family. We also have Dr. Sharon McDaniel, who is the CEO and extraordinaire social work historian, and just amazing in all the things that she does around child welfare and specifically focusing on kinship care. We also have Akora, I'm sorry, I know I'm going to mess your name up and I apologize. Ari Price, who is a panelist coming out of, I believe, Chicago, and helping us to have a greater understanding of what's happening in her space. We have Liv Bennett, our, just trailblazer here on County Council in Allegheny County, and giving her perspective. And last and surely not least, Shar Tillett, who is here to give us a perspective also around the arts and the work that she does with A Long Walk Home. So thank you, ladies, for being here. You look beautiful. We look forward to hearing from you. And without any further ado, Dr. Venus, take us away.
Greetings, 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 you all. How are you today? If you're like me, you've been jumping in and out of sessions, and the keynote today was fabulous. It's always great to hear our executive, our CEO, Dr. Kathy Elliott. I'm always humbled when I'm in her presence. So thank you all for being here. And just to get us started, before we even get into the attacks on CRT or critical race theory, and discussing how it's impacting the work that we do, why don't we have you all introduce yourself individually and the organizations that you represent, or the places and people you represent, whatever you prefer, and let us know a little bit about who you are. We'll start off with you, Sharon. How about that?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. And it's such a pleasure to be here, and so honored to be with this wonderful panel. And so I am Sharon McDaniel. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. I am the daughter of Joyce and William Tolliver, and I am the CEO of A Second Chance Incorporated, which is a kinship foster care agency located here in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia. Such an honor to be with you all.
Thank you, Sharon. Okaikor.
Hey, everybody. My name is Awo Okaikor Ayi Price. I go by Okaikor. The KOR at the end of my name tells you I'm a second daughter all second daughters in my father's nation will have, the family will have the KOR at the end. So I'm the second daughter. I'm the daughter of Melvinia Holland, who is from Newark. That's where I'm from too as well, Newark, New Jersey. My dad is Ni Ayi Kuma Ayi, who is from Accra, Ghana, and from the Gamashi area of Accra. And I am a former classroom teacher. I am one of the founding steering committee members for Black Lives Matter at school, and now serving as the executive director for the Education for Liberation Network. So, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kaikor. Liv.
Hi. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining today. And thanks for Gwen's Girls for putting on such an important summit and panel. I'm Liv Bennett. I'm the county counselor for District 13 of Allegheny County. Loosely, it is a district that stretches from Bellevue all the way to Stanton Heights in the city of Pittsburgh. Represent about 92,000 constituents. My work centers around social justice and equity work. Things that I've gotten done, for example, are banning hair discrimination in Allegheny County, making Juneteenth a countywide holiday, and creating a countywide independent police review board. So I'm excited to be here. My work spans across many sectors as an elected official, and education, and making sure that our young folks are getting a full education and not the whitewashed education that has been history, is part of my work as well. So thanks so much, and I look forward to having this conversation.
Thank you, Liv, for the work that you do. All right, Sheharazadeh, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here amongst fellow people who center Black girls. I'm Sheharazad Talet. I am a co-founder of Along Walk Home, and our organization uses the arts to end violence against young women and girls. We particularly empower girls in Chicago, Black girls ages 12 to 22 to become artists and activists. I am an artist myself. I am a art therapist, a healer, and a philanthropist.
Very good. So Sherazade is actually in my neck of the woods. So keep doing the work that you're doing, sis. My name is Dr. Venus Evans Winters. I also go by Dr. V. I am a research and policy scholar, and also currently serves as the Black Girls Research Initiatives Coordinator for the African American Policy Forum. As you all know, we're doing a lot of work right now against these bans and really trying to stand up for our rights to engage in our civil liberties, right? Whether that's at school, at home, in the courtroom, in our organizations, or wherever we're doing the work, right? Also, I am a clinical psychotherapist in private practice. I'm also a certified clinical trauma professional. I'm also a mindfulness and meditation teacher, and also the founder of Planet Venus Institute. So I wear, just like many of you, many hats. Many hats and many roles. And that's why I think that this conversation is very important, especially as we represent not only Black women and girls here in the US, but as Kaikor has pointed out, across the diaspora, right? And we're also, many of us work closely with Gwen's Girls and the Black Girls Equity Alliance. And so our work is really intimately tied not only to practice and on the ground, strap your boots up kind of work, but also policy. And so actually I want to start with you, Sharon, thinking about that idea, this connection between policy, organizing work, and direct practice, either with families, communities, or schools. Could you tell us a little bit about where these attacks against critical race theory, anti-racism, education, and intersectionality are taking place from your perspective?
Absolutely. And before I do, one of the things I forgot to do was just to honor the land that I sit on. And so the Cherokee, Shawnee, Susquehanna, and Delaware people, this is the space in Pittsburgh. And then I also want to thank Dr. Elliott for allowing me to be in this space, and also our ancestors. And so right now in child welfare, there is not a particular attack. However, as we see it happening in education, we know that it's coming, right? And so there is a movement that's called UpIn, and it's really an abolitionist movement that I'm a part of. And so you have the abolitionists, you have the reformers, and you have folks, everything is fine in child welfare, thank you, when we know that it's not, right? And so with the abolitionists, what we're really doing, we already understand the ill effects of the system on Black children and families. And when I want to just give you a little bit of statistics here in Allegheny County, we make up about 11% of the total county population, yet it's about 68% of Black children in the child welfare system. And of that 68%, close to 80% are Black moms, single Black moms. And so when we look at this work and centering what that Black mom is going through, the abolitionists are really very clear that we have to look back at why young people are coming into the system in the first place. They're coming in not because of abuse, but because of neglect. And if we don't go back to understanding through that critical race lens, the idea of slavery, the idea of historic trauma in our communities, the idea of separate and unequal education, redlining, discrimination, all of those policies that land us here in this moment. This is the work that the abolitionists in the child welfare, the UpIn movement, this is what we're moving toward.
Thank you, Sharon. You just actually brought it home for me as someone who spends most of my days actually preparing court reports and working with women, basically mothers, and fighting for their rights to raise their children during the dual pandemics of racism and COVID-19. As you know, we don't talk about that a lot because it's a very private, conversation around the dignity of the family and the child and the mother. So thank you. So Kaikor, I know that you have been on the front lines of this fight as far as public education, and you've had a presence, whether it's on the news or of course working with the African American Policy Forum, talking about CRT and its bans from the side of education and school administrators, parents, and teachers. So can you tell us a little bit about these bans and where are we seeing them, especially in the field of education?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to take us back a little bit because I think if we were really paying attention to some of these, because what we're hearing right now is a lot of the rhetoric that was already happening before. It's been happening, but it's been happening in smaller pockets, but we haven't been paying as much attention to it, right? So the same language that we're hearing around divisive language, this is anti-white, this is anti-American, that's the same language they were using when they were banning ethnic studies and in Arizona. That's the same language they were using when they didn't want ethnic studies being fought for, when San Francisco State folks, the Third World organization was fighting for it then. So we know that this is just a long history of that same language that's being repeated over and over again. And we noticed it back, and we started to become more aware. Black Lives Matter at School became more aware when we saw that we were being featured on a video where we were being told that we were anti-white, we were indoctrinating people, and we started to hear it a little bit more. We were specifically named in the legislation in Missouri for House Bill 952, I believe that's the number, where they wanted to ban, all critical race theory, 1619 Project, Zen Project, Zen Education Project, Black Lives Matter at School. We already know that there are about 8 or 9 states that have already put forth, like Oklahoma, Iowa, New Hampshire, Arizona, South Carolina, where they've actually put forth bills. And then we know that there's another 20 states that are proposing these bills to just completely disrupt the teaching of true history, the teaching of this nation, seeing it through a critical lens, right? So that we can examine the issues that how racism has been a constant since its foundation, right? Anti-Blackness, right? Anti-indigeneity. And at the same time, we also need to think about how this is not only just about critical race theory and teaching, but we're also seeing this as an organizing tool for an election, right? They're actually using this as an organizing tool to galvanize their forces, to galvanize their base, to mobilize them so that they can continue to maintain the structure of disproportionality, keep in power, right? The ways that we're seeing it in education, but across the board in all systems that we're seeing in place. But the other part that I want to kind of point to as well is we're also seeing this impacted by people who are not in states where it's being banned, right? Where it's, where it was, where people are afraid to even teach the history, or they're afraid to, read Ruby Bridges, right? Or Ruby Bridges being banned, or the books being banned. Like we're seeing now a whole list of books being banned, and anything that has to do with, that's written by people of color, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color that are telling the stories and narratives of. So we really are just seeing an attack on our very existence, our humanity, our way, our being. And really that's what this is also about too, as well, as like, how can we maintain a structure, a system that dehumanizes Black and other people of color, right? Whereas maintaining a structure where whiteness remains and white supremacy remains in effect at all times, right? Because that's the way we've always governed in this country. This country is always governed around white supremacy, racism, anti-Blackness, and anti-indigeneity, and dispossession of land from Indigenous peoples, right? And so that's what I wanted to say about how we're seeing it. And we're seeing people afraid to teach now, afraid to speak truth, or afraid to tell the truth. Where superintendents are contacting teachers and saying, we noticed that you're on a list that said you're going to teach truth. You either remove your name or suffer consequences, right? And so, by using those people as examples, now we're seeing other people who are not being told not to teach it yet, right? Or living in states where it's been banned, but they are afraid, right? People are afraid to teach. People are afraid to speak truth. People are afraid to come out. And it reminds me of, there's this Akan mythology called the Saint-Tropez Anomé, right? And the Saint-Tropez Anomé is a bird. It's also it's called the dilemma bird. And it's the dilemma bird because it's a truth-telling bird. For the hunters that hunt it, it's saying that it's going to meet their demise if they leave it behind, right? Because what you're doing is you're leaving behind a truth that will help push our society towards becoming its better self. In the words of Grace Lee Boggs, who would say, to help us become more human, right, beings. And so that's all I would like to say about that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Akaiko. Thank you for literally bringing it home. And I'm back home, right, Sankofa. And so I actually I want to come back to you, but I do want to go to Sherazade, because I think what Akaiko and what Sharon are speaking to is this idea of the people who are banning CRT don't even know what CRT is. Let's be clear, right? One, but two, it's really banning our abilities to do the work. So let's talk about that. So what does this ban look like, especially, considering they're banning things like 1619, intersectionality, conversations around gender inequality? How does that impact the work that you do on behalf of Black girls and women in protecting us?
Yes, and you could call me Cher, by the way.
Cher, thank you.
Yeah, it's really fun. Everyone calls me Cher. Well, I think this is really interesting, because I had this debate about the bans in terms of do they know what they're banned? Do they really know? And I want to argue that they do know. This is what I say. I say they do know what they're banning, because there's no way that in Texas you have 3 things that happen at the same time. You had a ban on critical race theory. You had a ban on abortion, and you had voter restrictions, all at the same time. So I think they actually have a very important strategy that we need to really look at. And we need to look at it because they also understand intersectionality. they are oppressing us in an intersectional lens, right? And so I think if we look at these things as singular moments, right? Like, which we know, this is like our theory, like is intersectionality, Black feminism, they understand that. They can't just, in terms of, if they're taking away power, they're not just going to do it through the voting. They're not just going to do it in terms of a reproductive rights issue. They're going to also do it in terms of theory and change and understanding through the education as well. And so I think it's just really important for us to kind of look at that, because I think oftentimes the left is always a little, sometimes not as organized around as the right is around, you know, in terms. So I think they actually really do understand intersectionality in a way, because we're being oppressed in that kind of way. How I'm seeing it as an organization that focuses on Black feminism and trains our young people to become social justice leaders, it's taken forever, I think, the world to catch up to like Black women, right? I think Black women are always ahead of the game. So the idea of intersectionality and in that framing, as that is our organization, has been a very hard concept for people to really understand, right? And when I say people, I'm meaning funders, and then I'm meaning the average white person who may not be as informed. And so I think this ban only kind of prohibits us from being able to really do this work in a holistic practice that really helps our young people on a daily basis. Like having that framing, having that understanding allows people to hold more than one thing at a certain time. There's no way we could deal with this crisis in a pandemic without being able to have that kind of framing of inequalities, that how we're being oppressed, and all, like I said, like we have to hold all of these things. And then I think that allows us to kind of do that. Yeah, so I'm gonna pause there, but I also just think that like the banning of Black History Month and on a simple level, like, you know, banning all these books, but also banning like people's culture of what that has to do on the girls, or particularly the work I do with Black girls on the psychic.
Yes, Cher. Yes, yes. So to be clear, you can best believe that the extremists, you know, these white supremacists, as well as, you know, those on the right, even some liberals, they definitely understand what they're banning. What many of them don't have is a degree in critical race theory. They haven't stepped foot into anybody's law, you know, law classroom or courtroom for that matter. So yes, to be clear, they know exactly what they're banning. They are very organized, and we too should get organized. So I did drop in the chat more information for those of you who are wondering, what is this thing called critical race theory? I dropped the chat. You can get involved with the Truth Be Told campaign at www.aapf.org, or of course, those of us here at Gwen's Girls will have more information about how to get active in your community. So Liv, I'm sorry, but these your people. I'm just kidding. Okay, they're not your people. They're literally on the other side of the table. They're trying to use law and legislation against you. So what does this mean? How are these bans against CRT, anti-racism education, 1619 Project, intersectionality, and let's be truthful, anything that centers Black people, African people, Indigenous people, and women, queer folk, right? Anything that will suppress the vote and our voices and our abilities to organize, to participate fully in our democracy. Talk to us about these bans from a policy perspective.
So from a policy perspective, if you read these policies that they're putting forth, like we have one in PA, HB 1532, that is aiming to ban the teaching of not just information around race but also gender. So you can't even be intersectional. Like you can't talk about Kamala Harris being the first, you know, specific Asian Black woman to hold the vice presidency, because you're now talking about race and gender. So like they're literally banning the ability to talk about anything that has anything to do with that's outside of white cis men. But not coincidentally, that's who most of our lawmakers are white cis men. So I think this really brings about the point of representation in these seats that are making policies, because we have white cis men, going back to Cher's point, doing legislation around women's reproductive rights. None of them are women. So like, you're speaking on behalf of folks that you don't that you don't even identify with, and then you don't even have conversations with the folks that you don't identify with before making these policies. So I think that when you read these policies, I mean, they're you can't mention race, you can't mention gender, you can't mention, I mean, there's just all these things across the board that will make it very difficult for us to, do the work that we know that needs to be done in our classrooms. It doesn't keep us from doing that outside of our classrooms. But if we're all paying into the same educational system, then I don't understand why we should have to do more work for our children than the majorative class has to do for theirs. So, or the so-called majorative class. So I just, I really believe, going back to what Akora, I'm about to mispronounce your name. Okay, Akora said, with, just the upholding of white supremacy. That is really the goal. It is really the whole crux of this whole thing, is just remaining in the status quo, so that those who have continuously benefited through our structures of society continue to do so.
Yes, Liv, you have a fight on your hands, because literally they are banning us. They are banning us, and they are enacting as policy white supremacy, patriarchy, imperialism. And that's what's happening, right? So Sharon, how does this play out on the home front for you and your organization, the community that you serve, especially since your job is to protect the most vulnerable of us?
Absolutely. And Dr. Liv, I want to give a shout out to the Truth Be Told campaign. Your website is off the chain, so I love it. I stayed on there for a long time looking at different states. And so this whole notion of House Bill 1532, this idea of remaining intentionally ignorant is what this process is about. And then also, if you go back to the Moynihan Report back in the 60s, this whole revisionist movement, that's all it is. The Moynihan, whether you liked it or not, certainly talked about these two different worlds, right? The black and white, and it's further apart. And moreover, the fact of the matter is the revisionists, and if you look at some of those reports, they said some people in slavery enjoyed being in slavery. Who enjoyed being in slavery? So we go look at this history along our continuum since 1619. This is just really a movement to actually say anything about us, anything that we talk about, Black folks' equity is anti-American, as we heard earlier. But when we think about child welfare and staying intentionally ignorant about the history of Black folk, then you legitimize and you pathologize that Black folks and the white saviors must save them, because something is wrong with Black folks, that the white folks from child welfare got to come in and save us because we don't know how to raise our children. But the last time I looked, we were raising white children. So we really are looking at the fact that we must view this from a data-informed lens. We must be able to tell the story to the leaders. I am bold and courageous. I am bold and courageous. Anybody that will meet me know that. But when you talked about the patriarchy, and this system is couched and set in and remains in white supremacy culture. And until we're able to look at this with a straight face and have these conversations, Black children who we are to protect will still continue to come in. But we also have to look at who are the decision makers. When you look at the police and educators are the predominant group that are mandated reporters who are reporting these young people, look at our history with educators and law enforcement. And when you look at who's providing services, who's in the judiciary, who's making these decisions, we have to look at it all. And that's the lens through which I ensure that every time I have a conversation, I'm looking at this critical race lens, because we have to dismantle what's going on.
Love it, Sharon. Woo! Okay, y'all, now y'all warmed up the tough questions. Okay. So what Sharon is really speaking to, Sharon, I'm going to shoot this to you, right? Because what we're looking at here is overlapping systems of oppression, overlapping systems of failure, as Kimberly Crenshaw would speak to it. But when we're trying to serve girls and women who have been failed by our housing policies, they've been failed by our employment policies, including unemployment and underemployment, as well as the criminal and justice system, right? So can we talk about that, Cher, and how does that make your particular group of people, women and girls, right? How does that make them vulnerable? So talk about what these bans and attacks look like on the home front.
Sorry, that was me, Cher.
Yes, Cher. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now that I got you calling me Cher, I'm like Sharon and Cher sound very similar. And so the question was around the bans and how they look on the home front.
Yeah, how do they look on the home front, especially considering, because Sharon just brought up a good point. She's talking about these overlapping systems of failure and oppression and how they impact Black girls and women at the intersections of race and gender.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with these, I think with these bans, if you don't have that lens, if you're not looking through that lens, I think I'm particularly thinking about right now, because it's very heavily on my head, is the R. Kelly trial. They just had the closing remarks yesterday, and I consider it one of the biggest trials we have right now in our country that is around Black girls, right? I think things like that will continue to allow to happen. You have 20 years I'm speaking in Chicago, and I know personally, worked on that film, Surviving R. Kelly. But if you're in Chicago, you just know personal stories every day and out about firsthand experiences about young people who've been really impacted. And I think about R. Kelly as the R. Kellys. And so how our young people were able to fall through the systems again and again, and by even if that is it's in the hands, but without that critical lens of seeing Black girls, things like that will continue to exist, where you have systems that fail them, you have people that fail them. I think with R. Kelly, it's interpersonal violence we're talking about. We're also talking about larger systems that continue to not care for Black girls. On a legal level, this should have never happened. It should have never, we're looking at child marriage, and we think about it only in Afghanistan, and we're not thinking about it with our young people. And so with Black girls, we think about missing and trafficking, and we don't include Indigenous and Black girls into that conversation. And they're the majority ones that are being trafficked and missing. And so I think if you don't have that lens, continue again and again, the invisibility of Black girls will exist, and you'll have these issues that are happening.
Yeah, and yeah, Cher, that's interesting. We were just having a conversation about, where I grew up on the south side of Chicago. R. Kelly is like a social phenomenon. It's like you can't, many of us have been impacted by it in so many ways, even especially those of us who deal with the child welfare system. We are seeing, these age gaps that's kind of taken for granted, especially those of us who are part of the hip hop generation, right? Akaikor, education on the home front. I know these bans are hitting some of us really hard. So what does this mean for practice and policy?
Yeah, you know, when I think about practice and policy, you know, if we're not, and this goes back to what everyone is already saying, that this lens, this analysis helps us get a better, more bird's eye view of what the structure of the system is and how dysfunctional it is. When we have that lens, we can, and this comes from the work of Black women, right? This is structured in an analysis of Black women, Black gender expansive folks. When we have that analysis, we can create and imagine a world that will better suit, that would be more structurally sound. And that's what we're looking to do, right? When I'm thinking about what the impact is in education, right? If we don't have that analysis, if we're not training up educators and administrators with this analysis, with this lens that shifts from a structural dysfunctional way of organizing our learning environments in our schools and to a more sound way of how we structure it, right? If we're not training them up, we're going to continue to perpetuate that all over again. So it needs to be reflected in how we train up our teachers, the teacher prep programs. It needs to be reflected in curricula, right? And what we're even teaching. If I don't get to see myself, my daughter said to me, the very beginning of school, she looked at her teacher's name and she's like, I think I got my first Black teacher. I'm like, okay, you can't make that analysis based on the name. Let's go and see. And she said she was just so excited to have her first Black teacher in her freshman year in high school, right? She spent from kindergarten and pre-K, it was all Black because we were at an in-home daycare, but it was from kindergarten all the way through, not even a teacher of color, better yet Black, right? And for that, and we know what the research says about the life opportunities and experiences that children will have when they have, at least what they're saying, if you have 3 Black teachers, your probability that you are going to go on and have a much more successful life, you're going to think more, you're going to have a better view of yourself, like so many other things that are just going to come out of having a Black teacher or Black educators, because this is not to say that all Black teachers are doing all the things that are great, right? But what I'm saying is having that experience, because you get to see yourself represented in this person who's teaching before you, right? You get to see the possibilities of what can and can be, right? So it's that when we need to see that in place, and then also in terms of policy, that we need some policy that's going to help build resources and put resources behind supporting this type of structure that we want for our children, our Black girls, Black gender expansive people as well. And I'm also thinking about when we're talking about push out too, right? When we see that having police in school and the impact that it has on Black girls. I grew up in a community that, and here in New Jersey, Maplewood, South Orange, it's notorious for being progressive. But also very notorious for being hella anti-Black. I mean, the ACLU filed the complaint against and this is starting back even when I was a child, like the fact that I got to spend time in Ghana and live in Ghana was because my parents were having my brother and I escape an anti-Black school system, right? Because they feared for our safety. And so what we need to start thinking about and imagining is using this lens. This lens is it's a gift that we've been given, right? And I think for those people who are fighting against it, they know because what's happening. And if we really think about when these attacks started happening, is because we started to see all the systems in this country right now have a microscope put to it, where people were saying, you need to change, it needs to transform. It cannot continue to exist in this way, we are winning. That's why they're actually pushing back this hard. We are actually winning because they're seeing a rapid transformation where people are looking at and seeing the leadership of Black women, Black gender expansive folks who are saying this, our school systems, our education systems, our transportation systems, our social work, all of the systems are harming Black children, right? Black girls, Black gender expansive people. And so what we need to do is we need to change that, right? And that needs to be built into our policies and our practices. And for me, it's even like we need to start thinking about a liberation-based education system, right? And that even I know is a whole nother, like we need to not only just transform, but we really start to think about what would it look like for us to design our schools rooted around the humanity of Black girls and gender expansive people. Because when we can reach them and start from them, we're going to be able to reach everybody and benefit everybody.
Yes, that part. So now, is it just me or is the Kaikour frozen on the screen?
I had to come. I was like, what is going on? Why am I like this? Forever.
Okay.
She was frozen.
That's your liberation call. You know, I thought it was just me. My daughter wouldn't let me be great. She's walking through the house. She like ringing the doorbell. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. There you go. So yeah, you know, it's interesting, Kaikour, because I've actually moved away from simply saying, you know, anti-Black. Really what we're looking at, what we're confronting is Afrophobia. And I you know, and for me, you know, as someone who deals with the mind, body, and spirit, it's really important to name these politics that try to attack our very being, our psyche. So not just the corporal, right, but also the mental, the spiritual, the cultural, and the socio-political. So Liv, I'm gonna kind of turn a little bit here, and I want to know for you, especially because we have a lot of here at Gwen's Girls, we attract a lot of girls, young women who are in this work, gender non-binary, youth and organizers who are on the front lines, you know, and I've had the privilege of working with them, right? So how will they approach politics, policy, advocacy, right? Sitting where you're at, right? You're in the hot seat. How will they, like, what type of lens do they need to do this type of work from a critical race perspective, a critical race gender perspective? What type of lens do you approach your work with?
I think the lens of experience speaks volumes. Nobody is an expert in your experience other than you. So that definitely brings, you know, and that goes back to what I said about representation. So if you have folks who are representing those populations, LGBTQ, if you got folks who identify as queer or transgender or lesbian or pan, like those views, those intersectionalities, those experiences, it placed into, I think that's exactly how you bake equality into your legislation, into your policy, is through the experience. Again, the experience that is legislating now are white cis men. So that is what is being baked into our policy and into our practices. But if you put other folks there that have a different lens, have different experiences, if you put a single mother who lived in HUD housing, if you put a queer person who experienced, you know, discrimination, I think that all matters. I also feel that doing this work, you don't have to, I mean, everybody's not geared to be an elected official, though I think that I fully endorse anybody who feels like they would love to do it, to run. However, I do understand, you know, everybody has their roles. We all have a position in the body, and your position might not be to be a legislator. However, if you're legislating correctly, if you are an elected official and you're doing it out of, you know, for the people, then you shouldn't be legislating in a silo. You shouldn't be legislating in a bubble. So you should be incorporating and bringing folks into the fold. Those young ladies that you talked about at Gwen's Girls, you know, get them let them write a policy. Let them really flesh out what it is that they would love to see, and then present that to a policymaker. Nothing that I do is because I had the brainstorm of doing it. Everything that I've done came out of somebody, of talking to community. Banning conversion therapy, I don't identify within the LGBTQIA community, but I heard the call that they needed these protections. So therefore, I went forth and helped to make that happen. So I believe that real policymakers, the ones that are really going to make the difference, are not doing this work unilaterally. They're doing it communally and collectively.
Yeah, so Liv, you're talking about, especially from a critical race theory perspective, intersectional perspective, you're talking about the power of lived experience and storytelling. So imagine if people shared their collective and individual stories to shape policy. And so for you, how does CRT or anti-racist education and gender equity language influence your approaches to practice or praxis?
Yeah, so actually I'm gonna, I just came from that fireside chat, and we had a whole discussion around our COVID report. And so I feel like I have to kind of bring that into the space, because I really think that, that's a perfect example of why this theory is needed, and important framing, because we're not experiencing this the same. Like, we did a COVID report on Black girls, from pandemic to protest, and there's no way that a Black girl had experienced this crisis that we're currently in, this pandemic, the same way, right? So it's like, so in a very simple level of everything. I remember I shared with the former panel that by the first couple months, by June, for example, white people, there's a Washington Post, a report that said that white people, 7% knew someone that had COVID by June 2020. And the girls that we work with, 24% said that they had a family member that died from COVID. Right there, from that on, we know that experience, their grief, their loss, the resources that they need, how it was showing up in their community, why that would be the case, because they're working as essential workers, as laborers, as people in their homes. They're taking care of their sick. They're experiencing so differently, and so a recovery plan, a need, programming plans, how you're going to do different things in the schools, culturally specifically, really lends itself to this lens of looking at it. Like, we have to have this kind of frame and not think, and this is what we all know, we can't have this singular type of approach around COVID, because people are being really impacted by it so differently. And that's why I think race critical theory is really, really important, and needed to be seen, because otherwise you're going to get so many people left out. And in this case, I think it's one of the most critical resources that we have in our country that we're leaving out.
I have to say, Cher, before I even knew that you were Cher, okay, I read that report and it just brought me life. So everything that we speculated, as it relates to Black girls, especially school age girls, it was true. And I don't want to give out the whole report. I see that Tashira has dropped the link in the chat. So that's awesome. We need to read that report, and we need to fight on a policy front, right? Because it was everything that we thought. This time last year, I was teaching young Black girls and gender non-binary youth on how to basically research, with other Black girls, and how to inform policy from an intersectional perspective in a Black feminist lens. And Cher, this time last year, there was no talk of a vaccine. So I'm literally triaging myself, my family, my community, and girls all around the country. But that report made it real. So it's tangible what the girls were going through. They were working and going to school online and taking care of younger children and the elderly while also trying to work. In some cases, they were, essential workers. So Cher and A Long Walk Home, thank you all for that report. We need it, read it, know it in the same way we know the Black Girls Matters report and the adultification of black girls. Okay, so y'all, let's switch gears, okay? Because I'm a healer. I'm a spiritual warrior. Y'all know this tongue, but I am a healer. Let's talk about healing, self care, radical self love, and wellness. This stuff, I won't curse because the young people are watching. This stuff makes us angry, it makes us anxious, sometimes depressed. Sometimes we do want to cuss and scream. How do you all engage in healing practices? What does that look like for you, Akai Core, or even your organization?
Yeah. So for me, it looks like, being in community with people, organizing. And I know that sometimes I think as organizers, and I entered the classroom as a teacher and who did organizing work, but that's also a lot on your body and your mind and your spirit. Particularly even now, like just last fall, I was quoted in a New York Times piece, and locally, people were outraged and were upset, and so were attacking me on social media and suggested that my address be posted so that it could all play out. And then I realized like the next day, I started getting a sharp pain in my side of my arm. And at first I was like, where's this coming from? And I didn't lift anything heavy. The doctor couldn't figure it out. And then I was like, oh wait, my body is responding to the trauma, because that was a very traumatic experience for me to have to think about, we need to go to a safe place. My daughter's crying. People were saying so many horrific things, right, to us. And so that meant that I needed to do spend some time being in silence with myself, reflecting on journaling. Sometimes looks like self-care for me. Also, continuing to joy, music. I'm constantly listening to music, meditating. I go outside and I sit outside by myself. Now I'm actually in the practice of exercising, but also seeing self-care as a communal activity, right? As not an individualistic tool, a capitalistic tool, but really me taking care of my body and myself so that I can be a better service to my community, and be in loving relationship to the land, to the other beings that I'm in relationship with. And it looks so many different ways. It could look like traveling. I haven't traveled yet because of COVID, but it could also look like travel. And I would often travel by myself, because I need time by myself too as well, to recoup. So I see that there's a time check, so I'm going to stop so we can get others.
Yes, so the time check was on my end. So we have approximately 5 minutes before we open up questions to the audience. So Sharon, in the face of these assaults, what does your radical self-love practice look like? What does self-care look like for you?
So Dr. V, I have to admit, I did not do this well at all. I mean, I'm learning to lean into self-love. I'm learning to understand the power of no, if you will. As women, we are healers. We're listeners. We're all things to all people, but we recognize that who's taking care of us, right? And so I've had to learn no, but at the same time, I'm thinking about, I read a recent article with our very own Dr. Valerie Kinlock, and you've probably read this. She talked about the Black Women's Gathering Place, right? I love that article, right? Yeah. And so that research was so powerful, because having those home places that Bell Hooks talks about, having those places where we can just chill and say, girl, it's going to be all right in the morning, because we're carrying so much of this. I'm learning to do that. And I'll just offer this I knew what I was doing in one way, but I didn't know how powerful it would be. So the year before COVID, I actually took my African American female staff along with the white ally female staff together on a retreat. And we had some real talk about what it's like to be a Black woman in America. And because that tension between Black women and white, when we had to get this stuff out on the table, I'm like, girl, when I'm saying this is what this is about. That was so powerful. So even in those moments, on not only the Black women gathering place, but when we have those allies, so we can help them understand who we are and how we show up as Black women, it was so powerful. So thank you for asking that wonderful question, but I'm trying to get better.
Love it. Love it. So community healing is a part of the work too, and ritual healing. Liv, how do you take care of yourself? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, so being that I am a legislator that often legislates things that are not popular in this region, self-care is real. Those that are local probably know that I took some hits last week. Was that last week? It's all running together. When I tried to do a mask mandate to try to curb these COVID numbers that are locally continuously rising. So of course, folks lost their mind. And so I really had to figure out some self-care last week because it really took a lot out of me. So for me, self-care can look like disconnecting one because I have stuff coming at me from all different directions. So, just deleting email, like, look, I just am not reading it. If it says mask mandate and it's from Bethel Park, delete. So just being real. So some of it is disconnecting. Some of it is being intentional on what I allow into my space and my sphere. A lot of prayer, meditating, prayer, spirituality is central for me. Therapy. I think that, as Black people, we do not talk around therapy enough and what would be how that's beneficial to our mental stability. Obviously rest is crucial. So, making sure I'm getting the adequate amount of sleep. If I need to just veg out in front of the TV, then that's what I do. So I really try to be in tune with kind of where my body is and what it's saying. Like I try to be I'm very graceful and compassion filled when it comes to other people, not so much when it comes to myself. So I'm trying to improve in that. And so as K-Core said, also travel's big for me, like just taking time to go. I've gone to the beach probably a handful of times over this summer just to sit next to some waves and be in the sand and really be intentional about doing some self-care in the scope of doing a lot of a lot of controversial, if you will, not controversial for us, but controversial nonetheless for the mass legislation. So I introduced something around CRT. I introduced stuff around mass mandates. I introduced things that are me standing in the gap oftentimes. So yes, self-care is very essential to this role. And echoing Dr. Sharon, thank you for asking this question.
Thank you, Liv. So share in the face of banning us, our right to protest, our right to breathe, our right to affordable health care, our right to an education. What does your self-practice look like, or your community healing work?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I think like everyone else, we struggle as Black women, it sounds like, with actually care. And this pandemic has tested that, like the need for communities. As an executive director, we're pretty intense, and also yet the moments of opportunities, and making sure that you're not sure if that's going to be there forever. So you're just trying to grab onto those while you have it and do some cultural shifting. And so that led me to, I think like a you know, going. But I want to say, I think the one thing that I think has continuously saved my life is art. And I'm the only one who doesn't have a background of beautiful paintings in back of me. But I can't imagine in this moment of the pandemic without our dance parties that we had on Instagram, without binging on Netflix. And me as an artist, I went back to making and doing art. It's what led me to create Along Macomb around 20 years ago. And so I deeped in practice, using the work that I actually do in terms of my advocacy and philanthropy and photographing Black girls and showing the spectrum and the stories and the joy and just honoring them. I got to work on this beautiful project around called Black Girlhood Altar project with 2 other artists, and putting even Black girls on an altar and just honoring them. And so those are kind of things that like I live for, that keeps me going, because that's like the heart and passion of my work. But also I personally know, as you guys personally know, that art is such care for us during this moment.
Yes, thank you, Cher. So thank you. Somebody just corrected me. So directory of Black women therapists is www.therapyforblackgirls.com, to be clear. And so so as far as I'm actually, y'all, we'll talk about this offline, but I really want to explore this idea of, because, you know, Audre Lorde has been co-opted with the whole idea of self-care. It's been like really co-opted by the wellness industry and all that. You know, people are profiting out of it outside of our communities. But nonetheless, this idea around wellness and ritual work. So I do recommend, this is a very bad shout out, but the Boss Chick's Guide to Mindfulness Meditation, a workbook for Black women. So what was I doing during the pandemic? One, I actually broke up with my oppressor. So I walked away from academia, even as a full professor. I know, Sharon, bad, right? I walked away from my oppressor on December 15, 2020. And it was mainly because I knew everything that you all are talking about, which is that Black girls, Black women were the most vulnerable during this pandemic, this racial pandemic, and during this racial reckoning period. I said, you know what? I don't need to be triaging 18, 19-year-old white girls. I need to be triaging my community, which was what we called for during the abolitionist movement, as well as during the civil rights movement. And so I just jumped to the other side. And so I went back to meditation, really like a lot of meditation and body work, because the way that we're going to heal and continue to resist is through moving our bodies. I don't care if that's twerking, I don't care if that's dancing, or if it's through yoga or learning how to sit still even when we have the urge to move. So, but nonetheless, thank you. At this time, I would like to open up the floor or the Zoom or the WOVA to our audience so that they can ask questions to our panelists. So I do see questions coming in the chat too, right? I see Dr. Elliott is going to help me out. I'm always waiting on Tashira to jump in, the world's best MC. So
you know, she is. She always keeps us in order. We only have a few minutes. We're a little bit over on time, and my closing is going to be brief. But I'm trying to see if there are any questions. I don't see any specific questions in the chat box right now. I think that it's more of a, people were just absorbing everything that you all had to say, and appreciative of the time and your willingness to share your thoughts and expertise with us.